You know that feeling when the world just stops? Not in a good way, like when you see something beautiful. I mean the other way. The way where the air gets thick and heavy, and every sound the ticking of a clock, the hum of the air conditioner suddenly feels deafeningly loud. That's what it felt like sitting in Dr. Albright's office, the pale afternoon sun slanting through the blinds of his perfectly tidy suburban Ohio clinic. The room smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee, a scent I knew well from my 40 years as a nurse. But today, I wasn't the one in scrubs offering a comforting hand. I was the one whose hand was clammy with sweat, clutching a crumpled tissue. On his desk, between a model of a human kidney and a photo of his smiling grandkids, lay a stack of papers. My papers. My son's papers. "The results are conclusive, Carol," Dr. Albright said, his voice gentle but firm. "The way you tell someone there are no other options. David's kidney function is below 15%. He's in end-stage renal failure. And you're a perfect match, a 1 in 100,000 match." He said that last part like I'd just won the lottery. I felt like I'd been handed a death sentence. Not mine, necessarily, but a sentence on my peace, my future, my body. I'm 67 years old. My husband, Frank, has been bedridden since his stroke 5 years ago, and my entire world has shrunk to the 4 walls of our little house, to the rhythm of his breathing and the squeak of his wheelchair. The thought of major surgery, of giving away a piece of myself. It was terrifying. But the thought of losing my firstborn son, David? That was unthinkable. That night, the unthinkable became the expected. My daughter-in-law, Jessica, had insisted on a family meeting at her and David's house, a pristine 2-story colonial with a lawn so perfect it looked like a green carpet. Inside, everything was shades of gray and white, cold and minimalist, just like her. David was there, slumped on their enormous gray sofa, looking like a ghost. He was so pale and thin, a shadow of the vibrant history teacher he used to be. My younger son Mark stood by the fireplace, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. He already didn't trust Jess, and his protective energy was coming off him in waves. Jess served chilled white wine, moving through the room with a practiced, polished grace. She set the glasses down and then turned to me, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "So," she began, her voice smooth as silk. "Dr. Albright called. It's wonderful news." Mark snorted. "Wonderful news? Mom has to have invasive surgery and David is sick, Jess. How is any of this wonderful?" Jess's smile tightened for a fraction of a second. "It's wonderful that we have a solution, a path forward. Carol, you're his mom," she said, leaning in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was meant to sound loving but felt like a cage. "It's your obligation to save your son. It's the purest way to show your love." The word obligation hung in the air, heavy and sharp. It wasn't a request. It was a demand, a summons. Before I could even process it, she added something that I'll never forget, something that gave me the first real glimpse under her perfect mask. She sighed dramatically and said, "In my family, you proved your love. You didn't just say it. My father always said love is a verb, an action, a payment for the privilege of being a family, a payment." She saw this as a transaction. My body, my kidney, was simply the price of admission to prove I was a worthy mother. David looked at me then, his eyes pleading and full of shame, and I felt the walls of that perfect, sterile room begin to close in. I knew, right then, that this wasn't going to be a simple choice. It was going to be a war. I drove home from that dinner in a daze, the streetlights of our quiet Columbus suburb blurring into long, watery streaks. The word Jess used echoed in my mind, bouncing around with the force of a wrecking ball. Payment. Who calls a mother's love a payment? It felt so cold, so transactional, like she was brokering a corporate merger instead of discussing a family tragedy. I spent the rest of the night checking on Frank, listening to the soft, rhythmic puff of his ventilator, my own heart completely out of sync with its steady beat. I felt a profound sense of loneliness, of being cornered by a decision that everyone else seemed to have already made for me. The next morning, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I called my best friend Susan. We've been friends for 40 years, ever since our sons were in diapers together. She's a retired paralegal, sharp as a tack with a bullshit meter that's never been wrong. I told her everything: the doctor's news, the pressure, and Jess's bizarre choice of words. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before Susan finally spoke, her voice laced with the dry sarcasm I knew so well. A payment? Good Lord, Carol. Is she talking about saving her husband or closing a deal on a new Lexus? Something about that girl has always felt rehearsed, like she's playing the part of the perfect wife. I know, I whispered, clutching the phone. But she's so convincing. David trusts her completely, and she's been running herself ragged taking care of him. Taking care of him or managing an asset? Susan shot back. The question was so blunt, it took my breath away. Listen to me, she said, her tone softening. You're overwhelmed. Don't you dare let her bully you into a decision. Your body, your choice. Period. I don't care if you're a 1 in a billion match. Her words were a life raft. Just hearing someone else validate my unease made me feel less crazy. To make matters worse, Jess had insisted she and David stay with me for the weekend. To help you process, Carol, she'd said with that dazzling smile. And so I can help with Frank. We're a team. It felt less like an offer of help and more like a strategic occupation. My house suddenly didn't feel like my own. That night, the storm in my head truly began to brew. I woke up around 2 a.m., thirsty. The old house was dead quiet, save for the faint hum of Frank's machines from his downstairs bedroom. As I crept down the hallway, I heard a low, hushed whisper coming from the living room. It was Jess. The sliver of light from her phone illuminated her face, making her look like a conspirator in the dark. She was pacing, her voice tight and urgent. I froze, pressing myself against the wall. I know I shouldn't have listened, but I couldn't help it. No, the timeline is perfect, she whispered into the phone. He's weak enough now that no one is questioning the diagnosis. Once we get the post-transplant data, the payout will be huge. It'll solve everything. There was a pause, and then she said the words that turned my blood to ice. Don't worry about her. She's sentimental. She won't back out. Her. She was talking about me. My heart hammered against my ribs. Post-transplant data? Payout? What was she talking about? I must have made a sound, a tiny gasp, because she spun around. Her eyes widened for a second when she saw me, but the flicker of panic was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by that smooth, composed mask. Carol, you startled me, she said, ending the call and slipping the phone into her silk robe pocket. I couldn't sleep. Just a late-night work call with the European team. At 2 a.m, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The time difference is a killer, she said with an easy laugh. Big product launch. You know how it is. I didn't know how it was. Nothing about it felt right. As I walked back to my room, her words played on a loop in my head. It wasn't just the words themselves, but the cold, clinical way she'd said them. She wasn't talking like a worried wife or a caring daughter-in-law. She was talking like a scientist or a predator. And for the first time, I felt a tremor of real, genuine fear. I wasn't just being pressured. I was walking into a trap. The weekend ended with a suffocating, false sweetness. Jess was the perfect houseguest, cooking meals, fussing over Frank, and talking endlessly about how this family teamwork was exactly what they all needed. It was a masterful performance, and it almost made me doubt what I'd heard. Almost. The words post-transplant data and payout had burned themselves into my memory. I felt like I was living in 2 separate realities, the bright, normal one, where my daughter-in-law was a saint, and the dark, terrifying one, where she was a monster. I just didn't know which one was real. A few days later, I went over to their house to drop off some of David's favorite soup. He was having a bad day, too weak to even get off the couch. Jess was on a work call in her home office, so I went upstairs to put away some laundry I'd done for them. Their bedroom was immaculate, like a hotel room. Gray walls, a gray bedspread, not a single personal item out of place. It was David's nightstand that drew my eye. It was cluttered with books on World War II, a glass of water, and his reading glasses. Tucked behind a thick biography of Winston Churchill, I saw it, a plain, unlabeled white pill bottle. My instincts as a nurse of 40 years kicked in immediately. My blood ran cold. Unlabeled medication is a cardinal sin, a terrifying red flag. My hand trembled as I picked it up. It was a standard-issue pharmacy bottle with a child-proof cap, but the label had been deliberately peeled off, leaving behind a sticky, white residue. There was no doctor's name, no pharmacy, no drug name, no dosage instructions. Nothing. I twisted the cap off. Inside were about a dozen small, chalky blue pills. "What are you doing?" I jumped, nearly dropping the bottle. Jess was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed. Her voice wasn't silky or smooth now. It was as sharp and cold as ice. I was just tidying up," I stammered, holding up the bottle. "I saw this and was worried." "What is it?" "You know David shouldn't be taking anything without Dr. Albright approving it." The mask slammed back into place, but I'd seen the flash of pure fury in her eyes. She strode over and snatched the bottle from my hand so forcefully, her nails scraped my skin. "For God's sake, Carol, don't be so dramatic," she said with a tight, dismissive laugh. "They're vitamins. A special blend from a European clinic that a colleague recommended. They're supposed to help with his energy levels. Vitamins don't come in unlabeled bottles, Jess," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "Artisanal ones do," she shot back, her smile becoming a predatory grin. "They're not something you'd find at your local pharmacy. Now, if you're done snooping, I have a call I need to get back to." She tucked the bottle into her pocket and walked out, leaving me standing there in the cold, silent room, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I left their house in a fog. Her explanation was slick, designed to make me feel old and out of touch, but I wasn't. I was a medical professional, and every alarm bell in my body was screaming. That evening, Mark came by to fix a leaky faucet under my sink, a pretense we both knew was just an excuse to check on me. I told him what happened, my voice shaking as I described the bottle and Jess's reaction. He stopped turning his wrench and looked up at me, his face grim. "I knew it," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "I knew I wasn't crazy. A few months ago, Mom, I saw her give David pills straight from a little Ziploc baggie in her purse. When I asked what they were, she gave me the same line, special supplements, and told me to mind my own business." He stood up, his eyes dark with anger. "She's been hiding this for a while. This isn't new." Hearing him confirm my fears didn't make me feel better. It made it all so much worse. This wasn't a one-time thing. It was a pattern. The whispers in the hallway, the unlabeled bottle, the Ziploc bag of pills. They were all pieces of a puzzle I was terrified to solve. The trap I'd sensed in the darkness was no longer a vague feeling. It was starting to take a definite, horrifying shape. The conversation with Mark left me deeply shaken. The fear was no longer a vague whisper in the dark. It was a loud, clanging alarm I couldn't ignore. But what could I do? I had suspicions, but no proof. Accusing my daughter-in-law of, what, exactly? Being secretive? It felt flimsy, almost hysterical. And every time I thought about confronting her, a wave of paralyzing anxiety washed over me. Jess seemed to sense my hesitation and doubled down on her psychological warfare. The next afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from her. It was a picture of David, asleep on the couch. He looked so fragile, so thin, the afternoon light casting deep shadows under his cheekbones. The caption underneath read, "He's fading, Carol. He asks about you every hour. He just wants to know his mom is with him on this. We need to book the surgery date tomorrow." My breath caught in my throat. It was a masterclass in manipulation, a guilt trip wrapped in a thin veil of concern. It wasn't a question. It was a command. And my immediate gut-wrenching impulse was to text back, "Of course, whatever you think is best." I put the phone down, my hand trembling with a mixture of anger and self-loathing. Why was it so hard for me to say no? Why did the thought of defying her make me feel like I was the one doing something wrong? That evening, I sat in the dim light of my husband's room, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. The only sounds were the soft puff of his ventilator and the gentle ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hall. Frank's eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, his mind trapped somewhere I couldn't follow. I reached out and took his hand, its warmth a familiar comfort, even if he couldn't squeeze back. Looking at his still form, I started thinking about our life together. 45 years of marriage. He was a good man, a good provider, but he was a man of his generation. Loud, decisive, and always so sure of himself. He handled the big problems, I handled the daily peace. My role was to be the calm in his storm, the soft place for everyone to land. I smoothed over arguments. I absorbed frustrations. I bit my tongue to avoid a fight. I told myself I was being a peacemaker, the glue that held our family together. But sitting there now, under the weight of Jess's impossible demand, I saw it for what it really was. It was a habit of self-erasure, a lifetime of it. I had become so good at accommodating, at making myself smaller to make room for others, that I had forgotten how to take up space. I had forgotten the sound of my own voice when it wasn't agreeing with someone else. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, and tears began to stream down my face, hot and silent. Jess wasn't just preying on my love for my son. She was preying on a weakness I had spent a lifetime cultivating. She had looked at me and seen a woman who didn't know how to draw a line in the sand. And she was right. I leaned my head against the cool metal of Frank's bed rail, the tears coming faster now, full of a grief that was about more than just David's illness. "Oh, Frank," I whispered to my silent husband. "What have I done?" I had spent my life avoiding conflict, thinking it was the noble, loving thing to do. But what if it wasn't? What if all my peacekeeping had just been cowardice? A lump formed in my throat, thick with a terrible new question. Did I teach my children that my love means I have no boundaries? That a mother's love is a bottomless well they can take from until she is completely dry? Did I enable this? Did I lay the groundwork for a predator like Jess to walk into our lives and see me as the perfect target? The weight of that thought was crushing. I wasn't just fighting Jess anymore. I was fighting my own history, my own reflection in the mirror. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that if I couldn't win this fight with myself, I was going to lose everything. My night of tearful regret left me feeling hollowed out, as if I'd been scraped clean inside. The self-pity, however, was quickly replaced by a slow-burning ember of anger. Anger at Jess, yes, but also a deep, profound anger at my own passivity. I had let this happen. I had stood by while the foundations of my family were being eaten away by a predator I had welcomed into my home. The next morning, I didn't call Susan to vent. I drove straight to her house. Susan's home is the exact opposite of Jess's. It's a cozy little bungalow overflowing with books, half-finished knitting projects, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. It's a house that feels lived in and loved. She opened the door, took one look at my puffy, red-rimmed eyes, and pulled me into a hug without a word. She sat me down at her kitchen table, placed a steaming mug in my hands, and just waited. I told her everything, not just about the bottle and the late-night phone call, but the awful, gut-wrenching realization I'd had by Frank's bedside. I told her about my lifetime of keeping the peace, of smoothing things over, and the horrifying thought that I had inadvertently laid out a welcome mat for a manipulator like Jess. "I let her see me as a pushover, Susan," I finished, my voice cracking. I think I'm the reason she knew she could get away with this." Susan reached across the table and put her hand firmly over mine. Her expression was fierce. "Stop right there," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "A good heart is not a character flaw, Carol. You raised 2 wonderful sons and built a life on kindness. Vultures prey on good hearts. That's on the vulture, not on you. Do you understand me?" I nodded, a fresh wave of tears blurring my vision. She let me cry for another minute, and then her entire demeanor shifted. The warm, comforting friend vanished, and the sharp, no-nonsense paralegal took her place. She got up, grabbed a yellow legal pad and a pen from a drawer, and sat back down. "Okay," she said, clicking the pen. "The pity party is officially over. Crying won't help us. Strategy will. Right now, all we have are suspicions and a bad feeling in the pit of your stomach." She tapped the notepad. "In my line of work, we have a saying, feelings aren't evidence, but patterns are. Jess has a pattern. Secret phone calls, unlabeled pills, manipulative language. It's time to start treating this like a case." I blinked, stunned by the sudden shift. "A case? What do you mean?" There no is one again. I mean, we stop reacting and we start investigating, she said, her eyes glinting with a fire I hadn't seen in years. From now on, you do not confront her. You do not ask questions. You do not let her know that you suspect a single thing. You are the loving, slightly overwhelmed, and compliant mother-in-law she thinks you are. You agree to everything. You nod. You smile. You play your part. The idea was terrifying, but also empowering. It was a plan, a direction. While you're playing your role, she continued, scribbling on the pad, you are going to be my eyes and ears. You need to document everything, every weird comment, every suspicious action, with dates and times. And most importantly, we need to identify those pills. She leaned forward, her voice dropping. Your first mission, should you choose to accept it, she said with a wry smile, is to get back into that house. I don't care what excuse you have to make. You need to get a clear, high-resolution photo of that bottle and the pills inside. Get a shot of the pills next to a coin so we can estimate the size. No more talk. We need hard evidence. Can you do that? I looked at the determination in my friend's face, and for the first time in weeks, the fog of fear and self-doubt began to clear. A tiny spark of that old anger ignited in my chest again, but this time it wasn't directed at myself. It was aimed squarely at Jess. Yes, I said, my voice steady and clear. I can do that. My mission was clear, but the opportunity was not. For the next week, I was on high alert, waiting for a chance to get back into their house alone. I couldn't just show up unannounced. Jess was too controlling for that. My chance came, unexpectedly, from Jess herself. She called me on a Thursday evening, her voice a frantic whisper. Carol, thank God you answered, she said. David is having a really rough night, a lot of pain, and I don't want Leo to see him like this. It's scaring him. Is there any way he could stay with you tonight? I would be so grateful. It was the perfect Trojan horse. My heart hammered in my chest, a mix of excitement and dread. Of course, Jessica, I said, my voice dripping with the concerned, motherly tone I was learning to perfect. Don't you worry about a thing. Bring him right over. When Leo arrived, he wasn't the bubbly, energetic 10-year-old I was used to. He was quiet and withdrawn, his shoulders hunched. He gave me a weak hug and immediately retreated to the corner of my living room sofa, burying his face in his tablet. I tried to coax him into a board game, offered him his favorite ice cream, but he just shook his head, his eyes never leaving the bright, flashing screen. The only sounds from him were the little pings and zaps from his game. I sat in my armchair, pretending to read a book, but I was watching him. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he had a worried little frown etched between his eyebrows that was far too old for his face. An hour passed in near silence, the only other sound in the house being the rhythmic puff of Frank's ventilator from the other room. Suddenly, without looking up from his tablet, Leo spoke. His voice was small, almost a mumble. Grandma. Yes, sweetie, I said, putting my book down. He still didn't look at me. His thumbs continued to move over the screen. Can medicine, for one thing, make you sick with something else? The question landed in the quiet room like a grenade. My blood froze. It was so specific, so chillingly close to the fears that had been keeping me up at night. I knelt down in front of him, trying to keep my voice steady. Why do you ask that, Leo? Did you learn about that in school? He just shrugged, his eyes still glued to the screen. Just wondering. Before I could press him, before I could ask the 100 questions that were suddenly screaming in my mind, the doorbell rang. It was Jess, her face a mask of exhausted but grateful relief. Oh, Carol, you're a lifesaver, she said, bustling in. How was he? Was he a good boy? She was looking at me, but I saw her flick a sharp, almost imperceptible glance toward Leo, a glance that was less of a question and more of a warning. Leo immediately shrank back into the couch. He was an angel, I said, forcing a smile. Come on, buddy, time to go, Jess said, her voice unnaturally bright. Leo got up without a word, grabbed his backpack, and headed for the door. As they left, Jess turned and gave me a hug. I owe you one, she whispered. Anytime, I said, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. I closed the door behind them, my mind reeling from Leo's question. The heavy silence of the house settled around me, and then I saw it. Sitting on the couch, wedged between the cushions, was Leo's tablet. It was an older model, with a long spiderweb crack across the screen. He had left it behind. My first thought was that it was an accident, that he'd be heartbroken without it. But then I remembered the warning look from Jess, and the way Leo had avoided my eyes. A cold certainty washed over me. He hadn't forgotten it. He had left it for me. I stood there in the silent living room for what felt like an eternity, the cracked tablet feeling impossibly heavy in my hands. It was an anchor, threatening to pull me down into a dark truth I wasn't sure I was ready for. My first instinct, my only instinct, was to call Susan. My fingers trembled as I dialed her number. "He left his tablet," I said, the second she picked up, skipping any greeting. "Leo, he asked me a terrible question, Susan, and then he left his tablet behind. I think he did it on purpose." I quickly relayed his words. "Can medicine, for one thing, make you sick with something else?" There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Oh, Carol," she said, her voice grim. "That's not a kid's question. That's a witness's question." She paused, and then her voice became firm, commanding. "Kids don't leave their tablets behind. Not in this day and age. It's like leaving a limb. He's trying to send you a message. You need to see what's on it, now." "But it's his private stuff, Susan. His games, his pictures. This is past privacy, Carol." She cut in. "This is about David's life. Look through it." Her words cut through my hesitation. She was right. With a deep, shaky breath, I unlocked the tablet. The background was a picture of a cartoon spaceship. I felt a pang of guilt, like I was betraying his trust, but I pushed it down. I scrolled through his photo gallery, first silly selfies, pictures of his friends, a video of their dog chasing its tail. Nothing. I checked his messages, his browser history. Nothing. My hope began to curdle into despair. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe he really did just forget it. Then I saw it. A simple, standard app icon labeled Voice Memos. My finger hovered over the screen. When I opened it, I saw a list of about 30 recordings. Most of them were what you'd expect from a 10-year-old. Funny burp, monster noise, song idea. But one, near the bottom, was different. It wasn't named. It was just labeled with a date from 2 weeks ago and a title, Driveway Recording. My heart pounding, I pressed play. At first, it was just the sound of car doors closing and the crunch of gravel. Then, voices, clear as a bell. It was Jess, talking to her parents, the Hendersons. Leo must have started the recording while he was still in the car, leaving the tablet on the seat as he got out. "He's getting weaker," Jess's mother, Eleanor, said, her voice thin and worried. "Are you sure this is going to work?" "Of course it's going to work, Ellie." A man's gruff voice, her father. Robert replied. "Jess has it all under control. The buyers are just waiting for the final data set." Then came Jess's voice, cold and impatient. "Mom, stop being so dramatic. It's going exactly to plan. His system is full of the agent. The renal failure is progressing perfectly on schedule. The doctors are completely convinced it's just a genetic breakdown." My hand flew to my mouth. A wave of nausea washed over me. "And the old woman?" her father asked. "Carol," Jess scoffed. "She's a bleeding heart. The second we told her she was a match, it was a done deal. The asset transfer is scheduled for next week." "Asset transfer. That's what she called my kidney." Her mother spoke again, her voice a nervous whisper. "And the money, Jess? Is it really as much as they promised?" "It's more," Jess said, and I could hear the smug triumph in her voice. "The results from this Ohio trial are cleaner than they ever expected. Once the transplant is done and we have the final clean tissue samples, we get the rest of the payment. We launder the profits through the offshore account Robert set up, and we're gone. A new life, a new start. No one will ever know." The recording ended. The tablet slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the floor. I stumbled back, gasping for air, the room tilting violently around me. It wasn't just my imagination. It wasn't me being a hysterical mother-in-law. It was real, all of it. The whispers, the pills, the lies. She wasn't just manipulating me. She wasn't just a cold, calculating daughter-in-law. She was poisoning my son, her husband, Leo's father. She was slowly murdering him for a payout. and I was supposed to be the final piece of her experiment. My own body, my own kidney, was the asset she was going to use to complete the deal. The horror of it was absolute, a black tide that threatened to drown me right there in my own living room. For a long time, I just sat there on the floor, the damning words of the recording echoing in the silent house. The shock was so profound it felt like a physical illness, a poison seeping into my own veins. But as the minutes ticked by, the horror began to recede, and something else took its place, a cold, diamond-hard rage. It was an anger so pure and so potent it burned away all my fear, all my self-doubt, all my lifelong habits of keeping the peace. The peacemaker in me was dead. In her place was a mother ready to go to war. I didn't call Susan back. I sent a single text to both her and Mark, emergency, my house, now. They were there in less than 15 minutes. Mark, still in his grease-stained work clothes, and Susan, her face etched with worry. I didn't say a word. I just picked the tablet up off the floor, found the file, and pressed play. I watched their faces as they listened. Susan's expression hardened from concern into a mask of cold fury. Mark's face went from confused to pale with shock, and then to a deep, blotchy red. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. The moment the recording ended, Mark exploded. "That's it!" he roared, lunging for the door. "I'm going over there right now. I'm going to kill her. I swear to God, Mom, I'll kill her." Susan was on her feet in an instant, physically blocking his path. "Don't you dare, Mark," she commanded, her voice like the crack of a whip. "You go over there now, and you will destroy any chance we have of getting justice for David. Is that what you want?" "I want to make her pay for what she's done to my brother," he yelled, his voice raw with pain and rage. "And you think a fistfight is going to do that?" Susan shot back, jabbing a finger into his chest. "She'll call the cops on you. She'll get a restraining order. She'll destroy the pills, smash that tablet, and paint you and your mother as a pair of hysterical, grieving relatives who have lost their minds. She will walk away from this, and David will still be dying." Think, her words, sharp and logical, finally pierced through his red haze of fury. He sagged against the doorframe, burying his face in his hands. "So what do we do?" he asked, his voice muffled. "We just let her keep doing it." "No," Susan said, turning back to the coffee table. She picked up the legal pad she'd brought over. "We don't let her. We trap her." We sat there for the next hour, the three of us huddled together in my living room, planning. It was Susan who orchestrated it, her paralegal mind seeing all the angles, all the pitfalls. "A direct accusation is useless," she explained. "It's our word against hers. We need to catch her in a lie so big she can't wriggle out of it. We need to let her walk right into her own trap." The plan she devised was terrifying in its simplicity. First, I had to be the bait. My role was to call Jess and agree, enthusiastically, to the surgery. I had to tell her I'd thought it over and that she was right. It was my duty as a mother. I had to play the part of the sentimental, compliant woman she believed me to be, lulling her into a false sense of absolute security. The thought of speaking to her, of faking warmth and love, made me sick to my stomach, but I knew Susan was right. While I was playing my part, Mark had his. "Mark, you're a mechanic," Susan said, looking at him. "You know cars, and you know people." She scribbled on her notepad. "I want you to get a GPS tracker, a small, discreet one. And I want you to put it on her car. We need to know where she's going. If she's meeting with someone, we need to know where and when." Mark's eyes lit up with a grim sense of purpose. He wasn't just the angry brother anymore. He was surveillance. "And the endgame?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "The endgame is the hospital," Susan said, her gaze steady and hard. "We let her go through with it. We let her check you in. We let her think she has won. And then, at the last possible second, before they can even think about putting you under, we walk into that hospital with this recording, with the GPS data, and we present it all, not to a nurse, not to a floor manager, but to the chief of surgery himself. We detonate the bomb in the one place she has nowhere to run." The room was silent. The plan was audacious, dangerous, and it depended entirely on me holding my nerve. I looked at my son, his face now a mask of cold resolve. I looked at my best friend. her eyes filled with a righteous fire. The rage in my heart solidified into something cold and heavy. I picked up my phone. "Okay," I said, my voice devoid of any tremor. "Let's set the trap." The days that followed were the longest and most difficult of my life. I had to become an actress, and the role I was playing was a version of myself I now despised. I made the call to Jess that evening. My voice, carefully coached by Susan, was full of feigned emotion and resignation. "Jessica," I said, a fake tremor in my voice, "I've been thinking. You were right. He's my son. It's my duty. Please, tell the hospital to book the surgery. I'm ready." The sigh of relief on the other end of the line was so smug, so deeply satisfied, it made my stomach churn. "Oh, Carol," she cooed. "I knew you'd make the right choice. I am so proud of you. David will be thrilled." From then on, I was a puppet, and Jess was the master. I went to pre-op appointments where I smiled and nodded at nurses who praised my selflessness. I packed a hospital bag with a book I had no intention of reading. I listened to Jess detail her plans for David's recovery party. All the while, a secret, frantic conversation was happening in a group text between me, Mark, and Susan. Mark had successfully placed the tracker on her car. The little dot on the map on his phone became our obsession. We watched it go from her pharmaceutical office to a high-end mall, and then, twice, to a remote industrial park on the outskirts of Columbus. The second time, Mark was there, hidden, and managed to get a grainy, long-distance photo of her meeting a man in a nondescript sedan. It wasn't much, but it was another piece of the puzzle. The morning of the surgery arrived, gray and drizzling. The world outside my window seemed to be weeping for me. Mark drove me to the hospital, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "The second you're in, Susan and I are going straight to the administration wing to find Dr. Evans, the chief of surgery," he whispered as he helped me into a wheelchair at the entrance. "Don't worry, Mom, we won't let them touch you." I wished I shared his confidence. Once inside, we were met by the welcoming committee. Jess and her parents, Robert and Eleanor, were already there, dressed as if for a celebration. Jess kissed my cheek, her perfume cloying and sweet. "The big day," she said, her smile dazzlingly false. Her father shook my hand, his grip unpleasantly firm. "You're a brave woman, Carol," he said, his eyes glittering with a greed I now recognized. They were so sure they had won. The next hour was a blur of sterile corridors and impersonal procedures. They took me to a pre-op room, a small, cold space with a single bed and a symphony of beeping machines. A kind-faced nurse helped me into a thin hospital gown and started an IV in the back of my hand. Every step, every clinical touch, felt like another bar locking me into a cage. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic prisoner. Where are they? I thought, over and over. What if they can't find the doctor? What if he doesn't believe them? What if something goes wrong? The nurse came back in with a clipboard. "Just a few final consent forms to sign, dear," she said gently. "Standard procedure." My breath hitched. This was it. The point of no return. I looked through the glass pane in the door and saw Jess standing in the hallway, watching me, her arms crossed. She was waiting for this. I took the pen, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold it. The nurse steadied my arm. "Nerves are perfectly normal," she said with a comforting smile. I looked down at the black line where my name was supposed to go. My signature, my consent, my death warrant. I could feel Jess's eyes burning into me from the hallway. Time seemed to slow down. The beeping of the heart monitored the only sound in the universe. "Come on, Mark. Come on, Susan, please." Taking a ragged breath, I signed my name. The ink looked like a black scar on the white page. I looked up. Through the glass, Jess's lips curved into a slow, triumphant smile. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, as if to say, "Checkmate." A wave of ice-cold despair washed over me. The trap was set, and I was the one who was caught. My signature on the consent form was a surrender. The nurse gave my arm a final pat and then, with another orderly, began wheeling my gurney out of the pre-op bay and down another cold, white hallway. Every roll of the wheels felt like a drumbeat marching me toward my own end. I saw Jess and her parents through the window of a waiting area. They raised their hands in a small, celebratory wave. Jess mouthed the words, "Thank you." The sheer, monstrous audacity of it stole the breath from my lungs. They pushed me through a set of wide, swinging doors into the operating room. The change in atmosphere was immediate and terrifying. The light was impossibly bright, shining down from a huge circular fixture on the ceiling. The air was cold and smelled sharply of iodine and sterile metal. A team of people in blue scrubs and masks moved with quiet, efficient purpose, their eyes the only part of their faces I could see. The steady, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor I was now connected to seemed to be counting down the final seconds of my life. They shifted me from the gurney onto the narrow operating table. Straps were secured over my legs and arms. I felt utterly helpless, a specimen pinned to a board. A man in a blue cap leaned over me, his eyes kind but his voice distant. "Hello, Carol. I'm Dr. Miller, your anesthesiologist. I'm going to give you something to help you relax now. I want you to count backward from 10 for me, okay?" This was it, the final moment. My eyes filled with tears, blurring the blinding light above me. I thought of Mark and Susan, and a wave of grief hit me. They had failed. The plan had failed. I closed my eyes, picturing my son David's face, and sent a silent prayer that this horrible sacrifice would at least save him. 10, I whispered, my voice choked. 9. The anesthesiologist was inserting the needle into my IV line. I felt the cold liquid begin to enter my vein. 8. Bang. The sound was so violent, so out of place in this sterile sanctuary, that it felt like a bomb had gone off. My eyes flew open. The entire surgical team froze, spinning around. The double doors to the operating room had been thrown open with such force that one of them had slammed against a metal cart, sending instruments clattering to the floor. Standing in the doorway, framed like avenging angels, were Mark and Susan. Mark was still in his work pants, his face pale with rage, and he was holding Leo's cracked tablet up like a shield. Susan stood beside him, her expression grim and resolute. But it was the man with them, a tall, silver-haired man in a long white coat, who commanded the room. His face was a thundercloud of controlled fury. "Stop!" he bellowed, his voice echoing off the tiled walls. Every person in the room flinched. The anesthesiologist, his hand still on the syringe, jerked back as if he'd been burned. "Who the hell are you?" the surgeon demanded, pulling his mask down. "This is a sterile field." The man in the white coat strode into the room, his eyes locking onto me, lying helpless on the table. "I am Dr. Evans, the chief of surgery at this hospital," he declared, his voice ringing with absolute authority. He pointed a trembling, furious finger at me. "And you will stop this procedure immediately." He turned his gaze on the stunned surgical team, his eyes blazing. "This woman, Carol Miller, is not a donor." He took a deep breath, his voice dropping slightly but losing none of its power, delivering the words that shattered the world. "She is the victim of a criminal conspiracy." A collective gasp went through the room. I saw a nurse's hands fly to her mouth. The surgeon just stared, his mouth agape. From the viewing gallery window, I could just make out Jess's face. Her smug, triumphant smile had vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure, unadulterated panic. The trap hadn't failed. It had just sprung, and the sound of its steel jaws snapping shut was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The chaos in the operating room was contained with swift, clinical precision. The stunned surgical team was dismissed. A nurse quickly unhooked me from the monitors and helped me into a warm robe, and I was wheeled out of the room that was nearly my tomb. But we didn't go to a recovery room. Dr. Evans, his face a granite mask of fury, escorted our entire group, me, Mark, Susan, and a shell-shocked Jess and her parents, who were intercepted in the hallway to a sterile, windowless conference room. The air was thick with dread and unspoken accusations. We sat around a large, polished table. I was in a wheelchair at one end, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, with Mark and Susan on either side of me like sentinels. Jess and her parents were at the other end, flanked now by a stern-looking hospital administrator. "Before I involve the police," Dr. Evans began, his voice dangerously quiet as he stood at the head of the table. "I want to understand exactly what has been presented to me. Mrs. Peterson," he nodded to Susan. "If you would." Susan calmly placed Leo's cracked tablet on the table. "Dr. Evans," she said, her voice clear and steady. "My client, Carol Miller, has reason to believe that her son's renal failure was not a result of natural causes. We believe he has been systematically poisoned by his wife, Jessica Miller, in order to gather clinical data for an illegal pharmaceutical trial." A hysterical laugh erupted from Jess. "This is insane. You're going to listen to this bitter old woman and her washed-up paralegal friend? I am a respected professional. My husband is sick, and his own mother is trying to sabotage his life-saving surgery with these vile, senile fantasies. Is this your voice, Mrs. Miller?" Susan asked coolly, and without waiting for an answer, she pressed play on the driveway recording. The room fell silent as Jess's cold, clinical voice filled the space. "His system is full of the agent. The renal failure is progressing perfectly on schedule. The asset transfer is scheduled for next week. Once the transplant is done, we launder the profits." As her own words condemned her, the color drained from Jess's face. Her father, Robert, started to bluster. That's been doctored. It's a deep fake. They're trying to frame us." Jess seized on the word, leaping to her feet. "It's fake. A fake. She's a manipulative old hag. She's always hated me," she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She's jealous of my success, of my relationship with David. She would do anything to ruin me." Her performance was wild, theatrical, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of doubt in the administrator's eyes. It was the moment she had been counting on creating enough chaos to obscure the truth. But it was also the moment Mark had been waiting for. "A deepfake?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. He stood up and slid his phone across the table to Dr. Evans. "Then I guess this is a deepfake too." On the screen was the grainy photo he'd taken of Jess in the industrial park, handing a package to a shadowy figure in a car. Mark swiped, revealing another screen, a map, showing the GPS logs from Jess's car making that same trip not once, but 4 times in the last 2 months. "Our senile mother is a victim," Mark said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "And my brother is your lab rat. Who were you meeting with, Jess?" That was it. The final, irrefutable proof. There was no lie big enough to cover it. Jess's face crumpled. The wild theatrical rage vanished, replaced by the raw, ugly panic of a cornered animal. Her mother, Eleanor, let out a wretched sob and buried her face in her hands. Dr. Evans stared at the phone for a long moment, then looked up, his eyes filled with a cold, professional disgust. He picked up the phone on the conference room table. "Yes," he said into the receiver. "This is Dr. Evans. Send security to the 3rd floor administrative wing immediately. And then, get me the police." Jess just stood there, frozen, as the finality of those words washed over her. Her mask didn't just crack, it completely disintegrated. The polished, successful, charming woman was gone. All that was left was a hollowed-out shell of greed and malice, finally exposed in the harsh, unforgiving light of the truth. The moments after Jess and her parents were escorted out by hospital security were a strange, surreal blur. The high-stakes tension of the conference room evaporated, leaving a vacuum filled with hushed apologies from the administrator and the quiet, efficient questions of the first police officers to arrive. I gave my statement. Susan gave hers. And Mark, his rage now cooled to a simmering, protective anger, handed over the tablet and his phone as evidence. It felt like we were characters in a TV drama, not people living through the worst day of our lives. But all of that faded into the background. My only thought, my only concern, was David. He was still in a recovery room down the hall, blissfully unaware that his entire world had just been detonated. Dr. Evans, who had become our unlikely champion, insisted on delivering the news himself, with me and Mark by his side. We walked into David's room. He was dozing, looking impossibly frail against the stark white pillows. When he opened his eyes and saw the 3 of us, his expression a mixture of confusion and hope. Is it over?" he asked, his voice raspy. "How are you feeling, Mom?" My heart broke. I knelt by his bed and took his hand, unable to speak. It was Dr. Evans who laid it all out, gently but without sugarcoating it. He explained the interrupted surgery, the evidence on the tablet, the GPS data. He told David that they now had reason to believe his kidney failure wasn't genetic, but induced. I watched my son's face as he processed the information. I saw the initial confusion twist into disbelief, then into dawning, sickening comprehension. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking ashen, ghostly. When Dr. Evans finished, David just stared at the blank wall opposite his bed, his eyes wide and vacant with shock. The love of his life, his wife, the mother of his child, had done this to him. The betrayal was too vast, too monstrous to comprehend. Within hours, the hospital had a specialist toxicology team running tests. The results came back before nightfall. Dr. Evans sat with us again, his face grim. "It's here," he said, pointing to a line on the lab report. "We found traces of a non-approved nephrotoxic agent in his blood. It's a research compound, highly effective at destroying renal function. It's not something you can get at a pharmacy." He looked at me. "She was poisoning him, Carol. We have the proof." He explained that they were starting an aggressive chelation therapy immediately to flush the poison from his system alongside his dialysis. For the first time, there was a real, tangible path to recovery that didn't involve me sacrificing a piece of myself. Later that night, Mark went home to get some rest, and I sat alone with David. He had been silent for hours, lost in his own private hell. Finally, he turned his head on the pillow and looked at me, his eyes overflowing with tears that traced paths down his gaunt cheeks. "Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." "Oh, sweetie, you have nothing to be sorry for," I said, my own tears starting to fall. "I do," he insisted, squeezing my hand with what little strength he had. "I let her in. I trusted her. I didn't see it, and I let her hurt you. I let her put you through all this, the pressure, the surgery." His words dissolved into a choked sob, the sound of a man utterly broken. I leaned forward and wrapped my arms around him, holding my son as he wept. The frail, conflict-averse woman I had been just a few weeks ago was gone. In her place was a mother made of steel. "Shh," I whispered, stroking his hair. "None of this was your fault. You were a victim. We were all victims. But we're not anymore. We're survivors, and I am right here. I am not going anywhere, and I will not let anyone hurt you ever again." In that quiet, sterile room, amidst the ruins of our family, we began the slow, painful work of healing. The weeks that followed were a landscape of quiet grief and determined healing. Our family's story became a local news spectacle, with unflattering pictures of Jess and her parents plastered across newspapers under headlines like "Suburban Poison Plot." I ignored all of it. My world had once again shrunk to the essentials. David's daily dialysis and therapy sessions at the hospital, long talks with the lawyers, and the quiet, familiar rhythms of caring for Frank at home. David was slowly getting stronger. The poison was being flushed from his system, and while the damage to his kidneys was severe, the doctors were optimistic. There was a lightness to him I hadn't seen in years, the lightness of a man who had survived the unthinkable. Life settled into a new, fragile routine. One afternoon, Frank's physical therapist, a cheerful young woman named Maria, brought over a new piece of equipment. It was a simple, clear plexiglass board covered in letters, numbers, and a few key phrases like, "I'm hungry," or "I'm in pain." With it came a lightweight headset with a long pointer attached. "We've been seeing some more consistent, intentional eye movement, Carol," Maria explained as she fitted the headset on Frank. "I think he might be able to use this. It'll be slow, but it could be a way for him to have a voice again." I thanked her, but in my heart, I didn't hold out much hope. We had tried so many things over the years with so little result. After Maria left, I sat in my usual chair beside Frank, the new communication board propped up on a stand in front of him. I started talking to him, the way I always did, filling the quiet space with the details of my day. "David had a good session today," I said, watching the late afternoon light filter through the window. "He was able to walk the length of the hallway twice, The lawyers think Jess's parents are going to turn on her to get a lighter sentence. Can you imagine? The whole rotten family is just collapsing in on itself. As I spoke, I noticed a flicker of movement. It was Frank. His eyes, usually distant, were focused with a burning intensity on the board. Slowly, painstakingly, he began to move his head. The pointer, shaking with the effort, drifted through the air and then, with a soft tap, touched a letter. The letter J. I paused, confused. J? Frank? Are you just testing it out? He ignored me. His breathing grew labored with the strain. His head moved again. Tap. The letter E. Then S. Then S. My heart began to beat a little faster. I read the letters aloud as he pointed to them. J-E-S-S. Jess. I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Are you trying to talk about Jess? He blinked once, hard. Yes. He started again, his movements agonizingly slow. P-O-I. My breath caught in my throat. S-O-N. Jess. Poison. The words hung in the silent room, spelled out by a man who hadn't communicated in 5 years. I stared at the board, then at my husband's face, at his eyes, which were now wide and locked on mine, filled with a desperate, frantic energy. The world tilted on its axis. He wasn't just a body I was caring for. He was in there. He had been in there the whole time. He wasn't done. With a final, shuddering effort, he tapped out 3 more letters. I-S-A-W. I saw. A sob escaped my lips, a raw, wounded sound. It all came crashing down on me in a devastating wave of understanding. All those months, while I was agonizing and doubting my own sanity, he had been a prisoner in his own body, a silent witness to the horror unfolding in his home. My mind raced back, replaying scenes with a terrible new clarity. The time Frank had knocked a glass of water from his tray when Jess had come near. I'd thought it was a spasm, the way his eyes would follow her around the room, an intensity I had mistaken for a blank stare. The faint, guttural sounds he'd make when she would bring David his vitamins. They weren't random noises. They were screams he couldn't release, warnings he couldn't voice. Tears streamed down my face as I collapsed by his wheelchair, clutching his unresponsive hand. "Oh, Frank," I wept. You knew all along. You were trying to tell me." He couldn't move, he couldn't speak, but he had never left me. He had been fighting his own silent war right alongside me. In that moment, the love I felt for my husband was so immense, so heartbreakingly profound, it filled every broken piece of me. He hadn't just been a victim of his stroke, he had been a hero in silence. Frank's silent testimony became the final, heartbreaking piece of the prosecution's case against Jess. The revelation of his trapped consciousness, of his desperate failed attempts to warn us, painted a picture of cruelty so profound that it left the courtroom stunned into silence. There was no defense for it. Months passed. The trial ended. Jess was convicted on multiple counts, including attempted murder, and sentenced to decades in prison. Her parents, for their role in the conspiracy, received lesser but still substantial sentences. The storm was finally over. The news cycle moved on, and the name Miller was once again just our own. Life began to find its new, permanent rhythm. David's health stabilized, the chelation therapy had removed the poison, but the damage was done. He would need a transplant, but now he was strong enough to be placed on the national waiting list, one of thousands, but with hope. He and Leo moved into a small apartment just a few blocks from my house. For the first time in over a year, I saw my son and grandson begin to truly live again, free from the shadow that had darkened their lives. We made it through the winter, and then the spring, and then one perfect Sunday in late summer, the kind of Ohio day that makes you forget the cold will ever come back. We were all in my backyard. The familiar scent of Mark's barbecue filled the air, a smell I now associated with peace. I sat on the porch, a glass of iced tea in my hand, and just watched them. David, still too thin but with color in his cheeks, was laughing as he and Mark argued over the proper way to grill a burger. Leo, no longer a quiet, haunted little boy, was running through the sprinklers, his shrieks of joy a beautiful, healing music. And next to me, In his wheelchair was Frank. His communication board was propped on his lap. He was slower than us, but he was present. He'd spent the last 5 minutes painstakingly tapping out a joke, and when David finally read it aloud, a terrible pun about hot dogs, we all groaned and then laughed. I saw Frank's eyes crinkle at the corners. He was smiling. He was a part of our world again. Looking at them all, my family, scarred but whole, I felt a sense of profound, bone-deep peace. The woman who had sat in Dr. Albright's office nearly a year ago, terrified and ready to crumble under the weight of obligation, was a stranger to me now. I had been tested by the cruelest fire and had not been consumed. I had lost my naivety, my habit of silence, but I had found my voice. I had found a strength I never knew I possessed. I stood up, raising my glass. Everyone quieted down, looking at me. "I just want to say something," I said, my voice clear and steady. I looked at each of them, at Mark's steadfast loyalty, at David's resilience, at Leo's reclaimed innocence, and at Frank's silent, unbreakable courage. This last year, we've been through hell, but we're still here. We're together. My eyes welled with tears, but these were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of gratitude and of pride. "I want to make a toast," I said, lifting my glass higher. "To family, the one we're born into, and the one we fight to protect." A chorus of "Hear, hear" went around the yard. As they all drank, I looked out at the sunshine and the green grass, at the beautiful, imperfect, fiercely loved family that I had fought for. We had survived. And we were finally, truly, beginning again. Thank you for coming on this journey with me and my family. When I look back on everything that happened, the biggest lesson I learned wasn't about the evil people are capable of, but about the quiet strength we all have inside us, waiting to be unlocked. For years I believed my value as a mother and a wife was measured by my ability to sacrifice, to keep the peace, no matter the personal cost. I thought saying yes was an act of love, but I learned that sometimes the most powerful act of love is saying no to manipulation, no to disrespect, and no to anyone who tries to silence your intuition. True strength isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about knowing which battles are worth fighting to protect the people you truly love, including yourself. This experience taught me that personal boundaries are not walls to keep others out. They are the foundations on which we build healthy, respectful, and truly loving relationships. For the privacy of those involved, some names and details in this story have been changed, but the emotions and the lessons learned are entirely real. It took a crisis for me to find my voice, and it makes me wonder about all the others out there. So, I truly want to hear from you. Have you ever felt pressured to sacrifice your own well-being for the sake of keeping the peace in your family? What was the moment you realized you had to draw a line, and how did you find the strength to do it? Please, share your story in the comments below, because your experience could be the light that helps someone else find their way out of the dark. Thank you for listening. Stay strong, and always trust that inner voice.